Hello there, I'm Dinah Liversidge. Welcome to my admin chat and welcome to my woodland. I hope the bird song and the sunlight through the trees is going to add a little extra to our time together today. So today in admin chat, I'm going to talk to you about imposter syndrome, or our voice in our head with which we have conversations that aren't always positive. I'm going to talk to you about what makes me an expert in this topic and how I have developed certain practices and language that help me to have a more positive outcome than I might otherwise. So, as I said, my name is Dinah. I'm a coach and a mentor, and I combine these two skills because, frankly, I'm far too opinionated just to be a coach. I couldn't keep in my own life experiences when working with clients and wanted to connect them often with other people I knew who could help them. And that, as a mentor, combined with my role as a coach, means that I've worked with a lot of people who say, I know it's my imposter that holds me back from that, and I really want to do something about it. And that's one of the first things I think it's really important to acknowledge. You know, I've worked with people from business owners to people in their last year at university. I've worked with teams. I've worked with really experienced executive assistants. And not one of the people I've worked with in over 20 years of coaching has not experienced the voice of the imposter in their head. The voice that says, you're not good enough, you're not able to do this, they're going to laugh at you, you're going to mess it up. And I think it is really important to acknowledge that. You know, what makes me an expert in imposter syndrome is I have conversations with my imposter every single day. The thing is, what I've learned to do is to embrace it and treat it in a way that allows me not to be held back from doing things I want to do. See, here's how I think we could start to view our imposter in a different and maybe more positive way. I see the imposter that I experience in my head as being very similar to the person I was as a teenager. Now, for some of us, as it is for me, that was a long time ago. But one of the things I remember clearly is that I never believed I was ready to offer opinions on things. I never believed I was grown up enough to offer opinion when I was around groups of my friends who were even just a few years older than me. And I think that if we view the voice that we hear as adults as our teenage selves, perhaps we could view how we tackle, for want of a better word, that imposter voice. See, I discovered that teenagers love boundaries. They're not going to admit that, by the way, but they do. They thrive when the boundaries are really clear. And, of course, when they feel fair, and when you've explained them in a way that isn't patronising and doesn't come from that place of, because I said so. So when you actually have real conversations with your teenagers, you discover they're actually seeking answers to real questions, but they're also seeking answers to fears. Many of those fears based on things they've heard from their peers or heard, third or fourth or fifth hand, and not always based on fact or actual experiences. So those become what I call scenarios of doom. And it's very easy as a teenager, when those are your only experiences and all your friends tell you, oh, this is dreadful, this is awful, this is a scenario of doom, It's very easy to end up going down that path, and that's what the voice in our head is doing. So we need to give that voice some boundaries. I believe that what this really comes down to is boundaries of language. And it's about saying, am I using language to myself and about myself that is the right side of a line? And that line is our boundary. And for me, that line is very much based around that amazing idea of Brené Brown's, that we should talk to ourselves like we're talking to someone we love. Well, I know that my teenage self didn't feel, and probably wasn't open to, very much love. And so now as an adult, if I see that voice as that rather unloved, fearful teenager, I can show the love and support and empathy that will allow us together to set a positive set of boundaries. See, I think we have to acknowledge that sometimes the things we tell ourselves are not the imposter, they're actually the words on the right side of that boundary. On one side of that boundary is the positive stuff. It's the things that say, I'm really scared about this, but I'm so grateful for the opportunity, I'll do it. It says things like, I've got this. I know I can achieve this. I know I can speak about that. I know I can join that group. I have something to add. It's positive self-belief, but also acknowledgement of truth and fact. I deserve to talk about imposter syndrome because I've had 52-ish years of hearing how I talk to myself and learning how to make that a more positive experience. That is on the right side of the line. Now, the wrong side of the line is a totally different place, but staying on the right side, this can be a really healthy place to be. This isn't about self-doubt. This is about keeping our ego in check. And it says things like, I still have much to learn. And that's a really positive thing to say. Whereas on the other side of the line, we would use language like, I don't know enough about this. Therefore, who am I to comment? But saying, I always have more to learn, I am open to learning more, is a positive thing. It acknowledges we know something. We're not being self-deprecating in the way that you are on the other side of the line. So I'd love you to think, when was the last time you were on that negative side of the line? For me, it was all about this video. This is my, is this take 4 or take 5? I think it's take 4. Because I was on the wrong side of the line for a couple of days. I found myself thinking it wasn't good enough, I wasn't adding anything new, people have all heard this before, what right have I got? And that's what I'm talking about, the wrong side of the line. And here's the big learning about this imposter, which I'd love you to grasp today. You and your imposter are in for a lifelong relationship. I'm going to say that again. This is a lifelong relationship. Tackling it, choosing how to treat it in a different way, deciding to show courage and stand up to it, doesn't make that voice stop or go away. You may have less conversations that feel negative. You may take action, which therefore changes it, but it's always going to be there. So the first thing that we need to understand about that teenager in us, that voice saying, could you just show me a bit of love and how to get rid of this fear, is to be kind. I noticed probably 15, maybe even 20 years ago, that the conversations I had were not kind. to myself. I would shut down my imposter, literally tell myself, don't be stupid, or you stupid woman, shut up. Now that's never going to help get that teenager over the line into a place of positive language. So start by being kind. The next time you hear yourself doing that language from the wrong side of the line, breathe and acknowledge it. So the first thing I did when I was getting all worried about this video was went, okay, feeling like I need to do another take. What's that all about? And I let myself be for a bit and think, what is that all about? And actually, I acknowledged to myself, it's about, this is a new medium for me. Presenting has always been something I've done with people, where we can interact, we can connect. You can stop me and say, no, I didn't get that. Could you put that a different way, please? And so I was anxious and nervous that no matter what I'd said, it wasn't going to be what you needed to hear. And by acknowledging that, it allowed me to go away and think, so how could I do that in a way that felt more authentically me? And the first thing I did was I got rid of my slides. And then I sat and wrote a few things that I knew had helped me in conversations I've had with that voice in my head. And I started again. But what I did was I allowed myself to do something that as executive assistants you're really good at and you're always really keen to do. And that was to find a thoughtful solution. And that's the second big thing here. We've acknowledged how we're feeling. We've allowed ourselves the time to think about, okay, what is that? Where's that coming from? But then it's about thinking, so what is a thoughtful solution? And as assistants, that's what we did. Certainly when I was an assistant, that felt like one of my main tasks. How can I resolve the issues that are taking up my executive's time that shouldn't be? And so here, I'm finding a solution by saying, I'll do this a different way. I'll allow that voice to be acknowledged. I'll say, yeah, I'm nervous about this. How can I allay my own fears? And I sat and wrote myself some notes, because that always helps me refresh how I feel and to go, oh look, I do have something to say. So that step of the thoughtful solution starts to acknowledge that this voice needs assistance and nurturing. If you shout at teenagers, the kind of response you're going to get back is not a positive one. It can also have a long-term, very damaging impact. And yet that's what we often do to our imposter. We shout it down. We get angry. And I'd love you to choose an alternative response. I'd love you to think, so how could I offer that thoughtful solution? Most of this for me is about language, as most stuff actually is in our world. And how we communicate with ourselves is also how much we allow other people to cross that line. And if our imposter is regularly doing it, if that voice in our head is giving ourselves negative reinforcement all the time, we're more likely to allow other people to put us down or use negative language about us. So when you're offering a thoughtful way of responding to your imposter, think about how that might also impact the way you let other people talk to you and how you then respond to them. Because this is where we get to choose our language and decide, here are my boundaries. I wouldn't let other people talk to me that way. And I'm not going to talk to myself that way. You know, imposter's a bit like a bicycle. Once you know how to do it, doesn't matter how long you don't do it, you'll find yourself going back and going, oh yeah, I remember how this feels. And one of the big things that we need to learn to do if we're going to nurture rather than be angry with that kind of nervousness inside us is to say, how can I create a different set of outcomes? You see, fear is a big part of the imposter. And there are lots of acronyms for fear, but one of my favourites is false evidence appearing real. We base a lot, and I mean a lot, of the stuff we tell ourselves on false evidence. We create these scenarios of how things are going to be awful or difficult, or we're going to mess up. But actually, if we decide that we could replace those scenarios with an alternative, with an outcome that could look different, then in that moment of fear, you get to show courage. And you get to say, I know that I'm afraid of this. I know I'm anxious. And I'm going to do it, and I'm going to expect a different outcome. I'm going to expect a positive alternative. I create little scenarios now when I'm anxious about something. I create a scenario of how perfect, for me, something might feel, or how joyful. And so I focus on good feelings, not the negative. And you know, this all goes back again to the fact this is a lifetime relationship, because you have to show courage to overcome fear. And showing courage to your teenager is inspirational. When a teenager sees a parent do something truly courageous, it can be a life-changing moment. So show the courage to that voice and say, yeah, you know, you're right, it is really scary and I might mess up and I might look like a wally, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it well, and they're going to love that I did it, and we're going to talk about it afterwards and say, oh, that was tough, but we did it, isn't that great? Language is a really interesting thing. You know, the fear that you feel is a hormone. It's a rush of emotions and chemicals in your body. And when you're about 9 or 10 or 12 years old and you're standing in the queue to get on the roller coaster, you know, the one that was absolutely bonkers and hung you upside down and spun you round, and you stood in that queue with such excitement, you really, really couldn't stand still. You fidgeted, you moved from one step to the other, thinking, come on, oh, for goodness sake, how long does this take? I want it to be my turn so I can get on and scream and be excited. And then when you screamed, a mate turned to you and called you a sissy, or laughed in your face and said, huh, you were scared. And you accepted that language. In fact, you probably even thought, oh yeah, I was scared. I did scream really loud. What a Jessie. And suddenly, excitement, something you were looking forward to, became fear. The change of that one word shifts entirely how you feel about doing something and whether you're likely to do it. So now think about, again, the language of fear. Think about whether you can shift the language you're using that's stopping you from doing things, that's keeping you small, and be a bit courageous. Because again, if this is a lifelong relationship, if these are conversations we're going to be having forever in our own self, then we have to challenge that language. We have to make it a safer place, a more positive experience. Many, many of you will know the book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Magnificent, magnificent self-help book that I've read many, many times. And one of the wonderful things about the whole concept of feeling the fear is to acknowledge that it's okay to feel a bit afraid, to feel a bit excited, to even feel like, you know what, maybe I'm going to look silly. Because when you create newer positive outcomes, you can say, yeah, I might look silly, and I might not. I might actually add something. I might actually contribute. I might actually be worthy of being in this group, discussion, conversation, whatever it is. So I'd love you to draw a line. Get a blank piece of paper and draw a line. And under the line, write some of the words that you know you use when those conversations in your head with the imposter are not a positive conversation. Things like, they'll laugh at me. I'm not as clever as them. They've got more experience than me. They'll find out I'm not an expert. Those are the kind of things that go below that line. And I'd like you to think about words to replace them with that you could put above that line. Now, you're going to struggle with this. That's okay. It's not going to be easy. And it's not something you'll do instantly. I put mine up on a wall and I always have a pen next to it so that I can add new words all the time, or new phrases, or new things that just help me to stay on that right side of the line with my language. Birdsong here is pretty special, isn't it? So, the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the kind of things that I do every day to help me with my language staying in a kind of more positive place. So the first one is to acknowledge every time you feel yourself heading down that familiar path, or you hear the language starting, take a breath. Pause and ask yourself, what's that about? Wonder what's making me feel that way. Why am I anxious about that? And once you've done that, take a moment to comfort yourself a bit. You're feeling fear. So take a moment, acknowledge it. I often find the best thing to do is walk away, if that's possible, from the situation and really allow yourself to say, okay, I didn't know that was bothering me that much. How can I find a thoughtful solution for myself? And trust me, you're not always going to have the solution straight away. Sometimes you're going to have to acknowledge, yeah, this is one of those things I find really difficult. I hadn't realised perhaps it was still bothering me this much. I will look at how I can change that for myself. Create a list for yourself of scenarios of positivity. And you can do this based on your experience to date. And this can replace fear, those false bits of evidence, the stories you've heard from others, the scenarios of doom you've imagined. This can come from a place of actual good outcomes that have occurred in your past, and it can be recently or it can be way back. Think of times when you expected a negative outcome and then got a positive one. and write those down. Those are the things to go back to when it's not feeling great, when you're struggling to think, okay, yeah, I want to challenge this, I want to do this differently, but those fears have really taken over now. That's become my thought process. When you can replace the false evidence with an actual example of something you've done, you start to see, hey, I've got a much better track record on this than I think I have. And a big one for me, and I talk about this quite a lot, but it's because it really does make a difference. A big one for me is to start your day by choosing your mood for the day. And when what you're facing is a voice that keeps undermining you, and certainly this is how I feel for myself, when I'm facing that voice regularly, then the mood I choose is nurturing. When we can shift from being angry with our imposter to actually being supportive and caring and saying, I see and I feel that this is a difficult thing for me, and I'm going to do something to make it less painful, less fearful, then we can actually shift and start to have a relationship with that voice in our head that can be life-changing and hugely positive.